The secret love letters that have been kept under lock and key since they were first sent. Today, for the first time, John F. Kennedy's letters to a Swedish woman are going up for auction.
Deep inside the White House, two secretaries known only as Fiddle and Faddle were splashing around the pool entirely nude with the President of the United States. It was just another afternoon for John F. Kennedy, the golden boy of Camelot, who lived a raw, double life as a sex addict while the world watched his polished speeches. He didn't just have a few flings, because he actually cycled through more than 20 women, including a 2025 revelation about a secret pregnancy. Jackie Kennedy knew exactly what was happening and even pointed out the mistresses with wet hair to her guests, which makes you wonder why she never walked away. Early flames. In 1941, long before the tailored suits and the podium, John F. Kennedy was just a 24-year-old naval intelligence officer with a serious case of bad judgment, and he was absolutely terrified. The world was at war, but Jack was busy falling for Arvad, a stunning 28-year-old Danish journalist who had already interviewed Hitler and was suspected by the FBI of being a Nazi spy. Picture this for a second. J. Edgar Hoover himself authorized 28 days of intense surveillance on the young lieutenant, bugging their hotel rooms and recording every single detail of their intimate encounters. It is entirely wild to think that the future leader of the free world was practically engaging in pillow talk with someone on the FBI's watch list, risking his career before it even truly began. Arvad was sophisticated, older, and completely off-limits, yet Jack couldn't stay away, setting a dangerous precedent where his intense desire for power was always eclipsed by his even greater desire for forbidden beauty. It was an era where the dangers seemed distant, yet the threat of exposure was very real, and young Jack was right in the middle of it. But the obsession didn't stop there, because fast forward a few years to 1953, and we find Jack on the French Riviera, now a congressman and married to a woman named Jacqueline Bouvier, yet still utterly unable to commit to one person. That's when he reconnected with Gunilla von Post, a Swedish aristocrat he had met just days before his wedding to Jackie, and he completely lost his head all over again. He didn't just have a passing fling with her, he actually wrote a letter expressing his deep regret about being married, suggesting they might still have a future together, and signed it, incredibly, as someone who was thinking of her constantly. Think about that for a second. He was literally entertaining the idea of leaving his new wife for a woman he barely knew, demonstrating a recklessness that would define his entire personal life. It was as if the security of his political future meant absolutely nothing when compared to the thrill of a new conquest, regardless of the consequences to his family or his reputation. And the recklessness spanned continents and decades, involving names that seem almost too grand to be true, like the legendary actress Marlene Dietrich, who claimed in her own memoirs that she and Jack had an encounter in 1942 at a Beverly Hills hotel. According to her, she was essentially unzipped by the young officer, who was completely oblivious to the fact that she was actually having an affair with his own father, Joe Kennedy, at the same time. Now here's where it gets interesting. These early flings weren't just about raw passion. They were about a pattern of risk-taking that seems almost designed to bring him down. Yet somehow, he always managed to evade the spotlight. It really makes you question what kind of man behaves this way, and more importantly, how did he think he would get away with it on the national stage? The sheer audacity of these actions, especially while he was supposedly serving his country in a sensitive intelligence role, reveals a man who felt he was playing by a different set of rules entirely. Would FBI tapes have sunk JFK's 1960 run? Drop your take below. It is absolutely fascinating to consider how these early reckless decisions shaped the man who would eventually run the country. And yet, the truly shocking part isn't just that he had these affairs, but that he was willing to risk everything, including the security of the nation, for them. The foundation of his double life was built on this absolute certainty that he was untouchable, a belief that would only grow stronger once he entered the White House. But the early years were just the beginning, a practice run for the immense risks he would take later on. Risks that involved much more than just a Danish journalist or a Swedish aristocrat. The sheer volume of women he was involved with early on suggests this wasn't just a youthful phase, but rather a fundamental aspect of his personality that he never felt compelled to change. He was driven by an insatiable need for excitement and validation, which he found in these forbidden relationships. It didn't matter the cost to others or to himself. The Arvad affair, in particular, with its espionage undertones and the constant presence of federal agents, must have been incredibly exhilarating for a young man who was already seeking to break out of his family's shadow. He didn't just ignore the risks, he seemed to thrive on them, perhaps thinking that he was clever enough to manage the danger. But as he would soon learn, some risks cannot be managed, only survived, and the consequences of his actions were just beginning to accumulate. This ability would serve him well in the years to come, allowing him to maintain the facade of a devoted husband and father while leading a completely different life in the shadows. But the early days on the Riviera and in hotel rooms across the country were the testing ground. It was a dangerous game, but one that he was determined to play, regardless of the stakes. Fast forward to the Oval Office, where staffers became playmates. White House wet work. Imagine walking into the highest office in the land, a place supposedly dedicated to the serious business of running the free world, only to find the President of the United States surrounded by secretaries, some of whom are completely nude, right there in the pool. It wasn't a rare occurrence. It was actually the daily routine for John F. Kennedy in 1962. He had two favorite staffers, Priscilla Ware and Jill Cowan, who were only 22 and 21 years old, respectively, and he affectionately nicknamed them Fiddle and Faddle. This sounds almost comical, like something out of a sitcom, until you realize they were part of a daily ritual that involved swimming in the White House pool and then running back to their desks with their hair still wet to resume their official duties. It was completely brazen, a literal playground right in the center of American power. And the absolute audacity of it is staggering when you really think about the implications for national security. It speaks volumes about the level of arrogance and the feeling of being entirely untouchable that JFK carried with him into the Oval Office. Here's where it gets really uncomfortable, because Jackie Kennedy was not oblivious to any of this. She had to navigate this bizarre and toxic environment where her husband's lovers were basically part of the staff, walking the same halls she was walking to entertain world leaders. There is a story where Jackie was at a dinner, looked directly at Ware, and simply told someone, "That's his girl," which is just entirely surreal to imagine. She didn't launch into a screaming match right there in front of guests. She just calmly observed the absolute chaos of her husband's double life and decided to endure it, likely to protect the image of the presidency and perhaps her own position. It makes you wonder about the immense pressure she was under, forced to coexist with the very people who were dismantling her marriage and her security daily. Was it just the 1960s? Or was this a unique brand of power that made him feel entitled to everything? The reality is, it was both a perfect storm of social norms that turned a blind eye to abuse and a man who took full advantage of it. The way she handled it, with a kind of quiet, dignified suffering, only added to the mythology of Camelot, even as the reality was collapsing behind closed doors. And it wasn't just the two secretaries, because the White House was essentially open season for any young woman who caught the president's eye. Take the story of Mimi Alford, a 19-year-old intern who was practically deflowered by Kennedy in the White House, specifically in Jackie's own room when she was away. Just think about that for a second. The absolute disrespect and raw power dynamic at play there. Alford later wrote in her memoir that it wasn't a consensual, mature relationship, but rather something she felt powerless to stop, which speaks volumes about how Kennedy abused his position. It gets even stranger when you consider that Alford later revealed she took LSD with Kennedy. That is a truly surreal detail that shows how far removed from reality his daily life had become. They were living in a bubble of power, illegal substances, and illicit sex, entirely detached from the realities of the Cold War they were supposed to be managing. This wasn't just a reckless affair. It was a profound abuse of trust and authority. This kind of behavior was normalized by his staff, who acted as gatekeepers for his liaisons, ensuring that no one else found out about the true nature of his afternoon swims. The sheer scale of his secret life is hard to comprehend. Even today, when we are used to hearing stories of political scandals and illicit affairs, he was a master of compartmentalization, able to switch between his public persona as a dedicated public servant and his private persona as a man obsessed with his own pleasure. This ability would serve him well in the years to come, allowing him to maintain the facade of a devoted husband and father while leading a completely different life in the shadows. But the days in the White House were the peak of this behavior, where the stakes were higher and the risks were immense. Yet, he continued, fueled by a dangerous mix of adrenaline, power, and a belief that he could manage any fallout that came his way. It was a high-stakes game that he was determined to play, regardless of the consequences to his family or his reputation. But I have to ask you something entirely genuine about this, a question that bridges the gap between then and now. The sheer scale of his abuse of power is something that would be plastered across every headline instantly, and yet back then, he was untouchable. The media in the 1960s was complicit, maintaining a wall of silence that protected the president's private life from public scrutiny, allowing this behavior to continue unchallenged. It's a sobering thought that highlights how far we've come, and perhaps how far we still have to go, in addressing the intersection of power and consent. The normalization of this behavior is a chilling reminder of how easily absolute power can be abused when there are no checks and balances in place. It really forces us to reframe our understanding of that era, moving past the nostalgia and looking directly at the uncomfortable truths that were hidden just beneath the surface. The White House had become a playground, a place where the president could act with total impunity. But this was all just a dress rehearsal for the affair that would truly jeopardize everything. The risks were high, but for Jack, they were part of the thrill, a necessary component of his existence. He was a man who felt he needed to have it all. And for a while, he absolutely did, until the world outside started looking closer. The daily routines, the brazen behavior, the abuse of power, all of it was escalating towards a breaking point. The normalization of these risks created an environment where nothing seemed off limits, setting the stage for even more dangerous liaisons. The staffers, the interns, the visitors, everyone was part of a delicate ecosystem designed to fulfill one man's insatiable desires. But Hollywood heat turned lethal with the introduction of the infamous Marilyn. Star Power Perils. May 1962. The world is watching Marilyn Monroe breathe "Happy Birthday, Mr. President" into a microphone, a moment that felt entirely magical to the millions watching on television. But behind the scenes, J. Edgar Hoover was absolutely terrified. It isn't just about the affair itself, it is about who Marilyn is talking to, specifically her alleged ties to communist sympathizers, which makes her a massive security risk in the middle of the Cold War. Jack wasn't just risking his marriage. He was literally sharing pillow talk with someone the FBI deemed a threat to national security, a fact that Hoover documented meticulously. He was so convinced of the danger that he was compiling massive dossiers on both of them, documenting every hotel visit and every phone call to the Kelneva Lodge, where Jack would escape to be with her. But Jack, true to form, ignored the warnings from his brother Bobby, who was frantically trying to manage the situation, treating the entire affair as another high-stakes game he was destined to win, despite the looming danger. Think about the sheer arrogance required to disregard the director of the FBI in 1962, a time when fear of communism was at its absolute peak. Jack was so confident in his position that he didn't care who was listening, or at least he acted like he didn't, which was a dangerous mistake. This wasn't just a fling with a famous actress, it was a reckless indulgence that brought the most dangerous elements of Hollywood and Washington together in a toxic mix. When Marilyn began demanding more than just clandestine visits, calling the White House and challenging Jackie's position, the risks escalated from personal scandal to outright political catastrophe. Bobby Kennedy was eventually forced to step in, acting as the president's cleaner, to keep the relationship under wraps. But the damage was already done in the eyes of the intelligence community. The paranoia was real, and it was fueled by the fact that Jack was entirely reckless with his own security, perhaps believing his own mythology more than he should have. But the Hollywood drama was only part of the story, because around this same time, Jack was deeply involved with someone far more dangerous, a woman named Mary Pinchot Meyer. She wasn't a movie star, but rather a brilliant artist and the sister-in-law of Ben Bradlee, the famous editor who would later bring down Richard Nixon, making her deeply connected to the power elite. Mary was intelligent, sophisticated, and entirely aware of the risks she was taking when she began her affair with the president after her divorce from a CIA official. This was a relationship built on shared secrets and forbidden thrill, unfolding right under the nose of the establishment. And it was a secret that Mary kept closely guarded. The CIA connections make it even more intriguing, suggesting that Meyer was far more plugged into the world of espionage than anyone realized at the time, which would have made her a major liability if the secret got out. The story takes a truly dark turn on a quiet morning in October 1964, just a year after Jack was assassinated, when Mary was shot dead on a towpath in Georgetown, a death that remains unsolved. It was a brutal execution, 2 shots at point-blank range, just blocks from the White House, and it immediately sparked conspiracy theories that have never truly gone away. What makes it absolutely wild is that within hours, a CIA counterintelligence officer was reportedly found in her home trying to locate her private diary. The diary was later burned, destroyed by someone who clearly wanted to keep its secrets hidden forever, which just fuels the suspicion that this was not a simple crime. It makes you wonder if Jack's love life was simply too dangerous for the establishment, or if Mary knew something that could have brought down the entire house of cards if it had ever been revealed. The timing of her death, so soon after the president's death, is something that has always puzzled investigators and fueled speculation about a cover-up. It really makes you question what kind of world they were living in, where the lines between personal life, politics, and national security were completely blurred, and where secrets were literally worth killing for. The fact that the investigation was so quickly closed and that the diary was destroyed so systematically points to a level of involvement that goes far beyond a simple tragic coincidence. It is entirely possible that Mary was just the latest victim of the reckless game Jack was playing, a game that ultimately cost him his life and the lives of those he was closest to. Killing or coincidence for Meyer? It is a question that remains unanswered, but the risks were clearly becoming lethal for everyone involved in his complex and dangerous personal life. The era of Camelot was built on a foundation of dangerous secrets, and the star power perils were just the beginning of the fallout from the president's reckless behavior. And the danger didn't stop with intimate secrets. Some affairs carried mob wire transfers, mob mistress mayhem. In 1960, a stunning woman named Judith Exner was introduced to Senator John F. Kennedy by none other than Frank Sinatra at a hotel in Las Vegas, setting off a chain reaction that would eventually bring the mob directly into the White House. It wasn't just a casual fling. Exner became a crucial link between the future president and Sam Giancana, the notorious Chicago crime boss who was reportedly helping swing votes in crucial states. Think about that for a second. The highest office in the land was being accessed by a woman who was simultaneously sleeping with the president and transporting secret cash for the mafia. She actually visited the White House over 70 times during Kennedy's short time in office, and the FBI was watching every single moment of it. It's absolutely wild to realize that the leader of the free world was practically sharing his pillow with someone who was also intimately involved with the very criminals his brother, Attorney General Bobby Kennedy, was trying to prosecute. This wasn't just recklessness, it was a profound failure of judgment that turned his private life into a massive national security liability. Now here's where it gets interesting, because the FBI was not just passively watching, they were documenting a dangerous conspiracy that tied the president to organized crime right in the middle of the plots to assassinate Fidel Castro. J. Edgar Hoover actually prepared a memo outlining these ties, specifically noting how the mob was using their access to the president to try to blackmail him during the Bay of Pigs invasion. Imagine the absolute chaos in the White House, knowing that the mafia had a direct line to the president while the country was on the brink of war with Cuba. Exner later revealed that she was carrying messages and even money between Kennedy and Giancana, a fact that makes the entire narrative of Camelot seem absolutely absurd. They were playing a dangerous game, believing they could control the mob while using them to secure power. But they were playing with fire in the center of the Cold War. And the risks didn't stop with the mafia, because in 1963, another security nightmare emerged when it was discovered that a stunning East German woman named Ellen Rometsch was participating in the same wild pool parties at the White House. Rometsch was allegedly a prostitute who had been planted to gather intelligence. And when the FBI discovered her background, Bobby Kennedy was forced to personally handle the situation. He arranged for her to be quietly deported back to Europe to prevent another massive scandal from breaking. But the fact that she was there at all shows how completely out of control the situation had become. It really makes you wonder what kind of information she was able to pass on, and how close the Soviet Union came to uncovering the true extent of the president's recklessness. The sheer volume of dangerous liaisons is staggering, and it highlights how completely oblivious Kennedy was to the risks he was taking with his own security and the security of the nation. Did Exner flip the 1960 election via the mob? It is entirely possible that the election was influenced by criminal elements who felt they had bought the president's loyalty through his own forbidden desires. The FBI tapes and the documented visits prove that the connection was real and that it was ongoing, creating a toxic environment where the personal and the political were inextricably linked. This wasn't just a series of affairs. It was a fundamental compromise of the presidency itself, a betrayal of the public trust that has been hidden for decades. It forces us to reconsider the legacy of JFK, not just as a charismatic leader, but as a man who was dangerously compromised by his own insatiable appetite and his dangerous connections. The normalization of these risks created an environment where nothing seemed off-limits, setting the stage for even more dangerous liaisons and the inevitable collapse of the myth of Camelot. The mob mistress mayhem was just another layer of the complex and dangerous life Kennedy was leading, a life that was finally beginning to draw the attention of those who wanted to see him fail. The risks were high, but for Jack, they were part of the thrill, a necessary component of his existence. He was a man who felt he needed to have it all, and for a while, he absolutely did, until the world outside started looking closer. The daily routines, the brazen behavior, the abuse of power, all of it was escalating towards a breaking point. Lesser-known bombshells sealed Jackie's silence. Hidden heartbreaks. In early 2025, a new book completely shattered the remaining myths surrounding Camelot, revealing a secret so explosive it was hidden for over 60 years. A secret involving not just another affair, but a secret pregnancy that almost derailed the presidency in its final year. The woman was a flight attendant named Lundberg, who found herself pregnant by the president in 1963, just months before Dallas. And it was a bombshell that would have destroyed his re-election chances instantly. The machine immediately went into overdrive, arranging a massive cash settlement to ensure she disappeared. A payoff designed not just to protect Jack, but to preserve the facade of the perfect presidential marriage. It is absolutely wild to think that this was happening while the world was obsessing over the glamour of the first couple, oblivious to the fact that the White House was functioning like a criminal enterprise dedicated to hiding the president's actions. The sheer scale of the deception is staggering, and it highlights how far the Kennedy machine was willing to go to keep the truth from surfacing. And get this, New evidence suggests Jackie wasn't just a passive victim in all of this, but was actually aware of the payoffs, potentially even complicit in managing them to keep her own position and protect the brand. It brings up a deeply uncomfortable question about her endurance, because she wasn't just ignoring one or two flings, she was enduring multiples, treating them as a necessary evil to keep the Kennedy name on top. Think about that for a second. She was acting as the CEO of Camelot, calculating the cost of each secret and approving the payments to keep the women silent, all while maintaining her public image as the heartbroken, devoted wife. It was a brutal, pragmatic approach to power, one that required a level of emotional detachment that is hard to comprehend, forcing her to sacrifice her own dignity for the sake of a political legacy. It really makes you wonder if she was a true partner in the crime, or if she was just so trapped by the expectations of the role that she had no other choice. If you think that's weird, look at Pamela Turnier, his press secretary who looked so much like Jackie. She was basically a doppelganger, showing how deep his psychological games went. Jack wasn't just having affairs, he was seeking out younger, more compliant versions of his own wife, right in her own home, which is a level of disrespect that is hard to fathom. It was a pattern of replacing the wife with a younger version, a psychological trick that allowed him to have his cake and eat it too, all while maintaining the appearance of a loyal husband. The staffers knew, the agents knew, and most importantly, Jackie knew. But it was all part of the game they were playing, a game where the rules were set by Jack, and everyone else was just trying to keep up. It was a toxic environment, built on secrets and complicity, where the only thing that mattered was maintaining the public image of a perfect, untouchable family. This wasn't just about one or two instances, because the book reveals that there were dozens of women, and the machine was constantly working to buy their silence. A system that was expensive and dangerous but essential to the survival of the presidency. The payoffs were not just small bribes, they were significant sums of money, designed to change lives and ensure that these women would never speak out about what happened. It's absolutely fascinating to consider how much money was spent on these payoffs, money that could have been used for legitimate purposes, but instead was funneled into keeping the president's secrets hidden from the American people. This was a well-oiled machine, funded by dark money, operating right out of the White House, with the full knowledge and approval of the president himself, a fact that would have been scandalous enough to topple any other administration. The risks were clearly becoming lethal for everyone involved in his complex and dangerous personal life. The era of Camelot was built on a foundation of dangerous secrets, and the hidden heartbreaks were just the beginning of the fallout from the president's reckless behavior. The payoff system was absolute. A well-oiled machine funded by dark money to buy silence and keep the truth from surfacing, ensuring that no matter how reckless Jack was, the public would only see the perfect image they were designed to see. But in the end, the cost of Camelot wasn't just measured in dollars. It was paid in heartbreak, secrets, and a brutal suppression of the truth, a cost that was ultimately too high for anyone to bear. The facade was maintained until the very end, but the hidden costs were astronomical, leaving behind a legacy that is as tragic as it is scandalous. It was a system built to last, but it was ultimately hollow, a house of cards that was destined to collapse under the weight of its own secrets. The true story of Camelot is not one of glamour and power, but one of deception and damage. A story that is only now finally being fully understood. From Hollywood legends to mob liaisons, JFK's double life risked everything for fleeting thrills, while Jackie's calculated silence held the myth together. Was she a victim or the ultimate strategist? Comment your take on the most dangerous liaison below. Ciao!